In this video, I'd like to show you a more advanced attack that can be used to completely list the contents of all the databases in this EMR system. And I'll explain to you why it's more complicated. So we're going to be attacking the user ID checker. This tool, when you enter in a user ID and press enter, it'll give you the username for that ID. That's all this tool really does. But the way that the tool is programmed, it has no sanitization of the input query string. So you can type in a very simple injection such as or 181 like that, and you can execute SQL commands pretty much arbitrarily. An outside attacker, though, may not be familiar with this database system, and they're definitely not going to want to go here and sit here and try and go through a list of SQL injections manually, entering them in. They're going to want to use a tool. In our case, we're going to be using a tool called SQL Map. What SQL Map will do is it will launch an attack at a specific target, try many kinds of exploits, and see if it's able to pull information from the database using those exploits. A lot of times with SQL Maps, especially for like example purposes, you can just give it the URL, which is already known to be vulnerable, and then a few more options, and it will launch the attacks and come back successful. Pretty simple. But that can't be done in our case. And the reason is that this form right here is only available for an active user session. And I can test that out by copying the link here, copy, and then go to a private window, which does not store the session cookies from the non-private window. Go to that same URL, and you can see it kicks you right back to the login page. So if we tried to run SQL Map without having a session established, this is all that the SQL Map would be able to see, is this login page. So because we have a session already open here, what we can do is we can get the session information from this session and plug it into SQL Map. And to do that, I'll be using Wireshark. So open up Wireshark and start capturing on the Ethernet port. Go back to my website and just click any of the buttons here. Then go back to Wireshark, stop the capture, and I can scroll up until I see the HTTP requests. So this right here is the HTTP request that we sent to the server when we clicked on that button. And down in the listing here under Hypertext Transfer Protocol, if you open that up, down here we have the cookie, which has our PHP sesh ID, which in this case gives you this string here. This is what identifies our session in the browser and tells the server who we are and who we're logged in as. Now that we have this session ID, what we can do is we can feed this into SQL Map and use that session to attack that web form. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to the EMR and I will go to the form in particular we want to attack, which in this case is the user ID checker. I'm going to take that URL, copy it, and then we'll go to our terminal and we're going to plug it into SQL Map. So this is the first part of the command. We're calling SQL Map with the U option, which stands for URL, and we're giving it the URL that we want to attack. But we also need to account for the session. So because we already have a session going, I'm going to go back to Wireshark. I'm going to right click on our cookie right here for our session ID, copy, and then copy value. I'll go back to the terminal, double backslash cookie equals, and then paste in that value. And in this case, we need to add in just one more option, which is -- forms. And now we can press enter. So SQL Map has identified this as a form. So we're going to go ahead and hit Y. And for now, we're just going to leave it as the default. So just press enter. And we can select Y for enter random values. And from now, it's going to automatically go through and try different database techniques, exploitation techniques, and see what it turns up. So now that it's found the backend as being MySQL, we can, in this case, skip the remaining payloads. And for the remaining tests, we're just going to hit Y and keep it as default. So after checking a bit, it's found that the post parameter ID is vulnerable to injection. So at this point, for this example, we're just going to hit N for no to skip the rest of the testing for vulnerabilities. So SQL Map has now found a payload that works with this form, and it's able to be injected. So now we're going to hit Y. It's going to begin launching attacks against that database. For timing attacks, we can also just hit Y, and there we go. So the way SQL map works, even though it doesn't look like it did very much, what it's done is it's identified a payload that works with this database and has added it to its own database system. So now when we run more commands from SQL map on the same host, it won't have to rediscover vulnerabilities again. It'll just be able to use what it already found and use that as an attack platform. So now we're going to run the same command from before, but in this case we're going to add another option into here, which in the man page for SQL map is --current DB. So we're going to enter in --current DB. We're going to hit Y for this form, enter, and then Y again, and then Y again. And what it'll try doing now is it's going to try and find the name of the database that we're currently using. And we can go ahead and hit Y to optimize the values for delay responses. So it's come back saying that the current database is EMR. So that's the name of the database that this web app is using. So now we can use the same command from before, and we're going to type in --database equals EMR --tables. And what this will do is it will tell SQL map to go in and try and find the tables in this database. Same as before, it's going to hit Y, enter, and Y, and then Y again. And when it asks for, if it asks for it, we're going to hit Y on the timing attack optimization. So yeah, Y again. So now that it's finished, you can see that it's come up with a lot of information from the database. If we scroll up here, this one right here, this information schema, that's a default table for MySQL, so we can pretty much ignore that for right now. But this table right here for this database, EMR, this is the one we're interested in. And we have users, tips, and patients. These are each tables of the database. So while we can get a lot of information from all of these tables, we're going to right now focus on the users table. So I'm going to use the same command from before, but I'm going to remove the other options and just leave it at the forms option. Then I'm going to use D, and then EMR, and then T, users, dump. So what this will do is it will use the EMR database, specifically the users table, and it will dump the contents of that table. So now you can see here that it's dumped the entire users database, including the username and password. There is no obfuscation or encryption of the password at all in this system right now. But if there was, for example, if there was a MD5 sum of the password here, SQL map could automatically decode the passwords and try and figure out what the plain text versions of them are. So we can test out one of these other logins. So for example, I'm going to pick Dr. Evil, who has the password Shark Laser. I'm going to do log off, do Dr. Evil, Shark Laser. And it's logged me in as that user. And you can see that some of the admin tools are now missing because I'm no longer logged in as an administrator. But now that you have full access to the database, there's a lot of things you can do. For example, you can see there's an enabled flag. So this organization may, for example, for new accounts, when they register, their accounts start off as disabled, so you can't log in. So with this kind of attack, what you could do is you could modify this table, find a user, like if you make a new user, for example, you could find your user in this table and modify it so that it is enabled, and it will let you log into the system. And you could potentially even change it to an admin account. Just by changing this number here, you could make any of these accounts an admin account.